Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. The United States has warned Russia and China not to disregard the re-imposition of all UN sanctions on Iran. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Washington will sanction both the countries if they refuse to comply with the measures against Tehran. Earlier, U.S. President Donald Trump directed Pompeo to notify the UN Security Council that Washington intends to restore UN sanctions on Tehran. The U.S. has recorded over 1,300 deaths overnight, raising the toll to over 173,000 with 5.5 million infections, while Brazil has reported more than 1,200 deaths and over 49,000 new COVID-19 cases in the past 24 hours. India sees highest single-day jump in COVID-19 cases with nearly 70,000 tested positive, taking the caseload to over 2.8 million, while 977 people died overnight. Pakistan continues to report a downward trend in COVID-19 cases and deaths as 8 people lost their lives, while 513 tested positive in the past 24 hours. Globally, the pandemic has infected over 22.3 million people and claimed more than 786,000 lives. The UN Security Council has condemned a mutiny in Mali and urged the military to immediately release all government officials. In an urgent meeting, the 15-member council asked the military to return to their barracks without any delay. Israel says its tanks have targeted multiple locations on the Gaza Strip. The Israeli Defense Ministry says it struck Hamas military posts in retaliation to incendiary balloon attacks. No casualties have been reported so far. In Pakistan, 14 people have died in torrential rains overnight in different parts of the most populated Punjab province. Rescue officials say several were injured in rains that devastated the central region of the province. And in football, Bayern Munich beat Olympique Lyonnais by 3-0 to reach the finals of the Champions League at Estadio José Alvalade. Bayern will be looking for their 6th European crown when they face Paris Saint-Germain in the final on Sunday. News in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back now for the news in detail. We start from the United States, which has warned Russia and China not to disregard the re-imposition of all UN sanctions on Iran. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Washington will sanction both the countries if they refuse to comply with the measures against Tehran. Pompeo lamented European nations' decision to abstain from the UNSC vote over the arms embargo, saying it made the European people less safe. The Secretary of State will submit a complaint about Tehran's non-compliance with the 2015 nuclear deal in the Council. Earlier, U.S. President Donald Trump directed Pompeo to notify the UN Security Council that Washington intends to restore UN sanctions on Tehran.
Today, I'm directing the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, to notify the UN Security Council that the United States intends to restore virtually all of the previously suspended United Nations sanctions on Iran. It's a snapback, not uncommon.
The Security Council will have 30 days to adopt a resolution to extend the sanctions relief for Tehran. Otherwise, the measures will automatically come into effect. Now, the U.S. has imposed Iran-related sanctions on 2 United Arab Emirates-based companies. In a statement, the Treasury Department accused both companies of providing support to Iranian airline Mahan Air. It also blacklisted Amin Mahdavi, an Iranian national based in the UAE. The Treasury Department said that Iran uses Mahan Air as a tool to spread its destabilizing agenda around the world. The move freezes any U.S. assets of those blacklisted and generally bars Americans from dealing with them. Tensions between the U.S. and Iran have spiked since President Donald Trump unilaterally withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal in 2018. U.S. President Donald Trump says he expects Saudi Arabia will join the Israel-UAE deal known as the Abraham Accord. Speaking at a press conference, Trump said a lot of countries wanted to join the deal. Under the U.S. brokered deal, Israel has agreed to suspend West Bank annexation for a complete establishment of diplomatic ties with the UAE. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia says it will not forge a diplomatic relationship with Israel until Tel Aviv signs a peace accord with the Palestinians. It added Israel's unilateral moves with regards to settlements in the West Bank are hindering chances for peace in the Middle East. Israel says its tanks have targeted multiple locations on the Gaza Strip. The Israeli Defense Ministry says it struck Hamas military posts in retaliation to incendiary balloon attacks. No casualties have been reported so far. The Israeli military says positions of the Izz ad-Din al-Qassam brigades were targeted in the raid. Tensions have risen for over a week as Israel continues to bomb the Gaza Strip, accusing Hamas of launching explosive balloons across the border. Israel has also closed the Karim Abu Salim goods crossing with the Gaza Strip. The United States has recorded over 1,300 deaths due to COVID-19 overnight, with a total crossing 173,000 with over 5.5 million infections. While Brazil has reported more than 1,200 deaths and some 49,000 new cases in the past 24 hours. Globally, the pandemic has infected over 22.4 million people and claimed more than 787,000 lives. More in this report.
As news of vaccines being made across the world stokes hope for many, the coronavirus continues to claim thousands of lives each day. Brazil has expressed cautious optimism that the country's outbreak may be slowing down as the number of new deaths and cases reported dips after a July peak. Mexico said it will carry out phase 3 testing of the Russian coronavirus vaccine amid efforts to control the pandemic. While in the US, President Donald Trump has touted convalescent plasma as his latest coronavirus treatment.
But I've heard fantastic things about convalescent plasma, and I've heard numbers way over 50% success. And people are dying, and we should have it approved if it's good. And I'm hearing it's good. I heard from people at the FDA that it's good.
In Europe, despite reporting another post-lockdown peak in infections, French President Emmanuel Macron has ruled out reimposing national lockdown. Whereas Spain has issued orders for an outdoor smoking ban, nightclubs to shut, and a curfew on bars and restaurants to help slow the spread of COVID-19. While New Zealand reported 5 new confirmed cases as the nation battles a fresh outbreak in its biggest city of Auckland. In Australia, the second most populous state of Victoria has reported a small increase in the number of cases, raising hopes that the lockdown is yielding results.
It's too early, sadly. I know it's very frustrating, and we'd all love to know a clear blueprint every single day and we tick them off and move from one phase to another. We would love that, the notion, I'm sure Victorians would too, but the issue around the fact that this is not just wildly infectious, but it can be stubborn. It can sit there and be really difficult to extinguish or even to bring down to a much more sustainable number.
In Asia, mainland China reported 7 new imported cases with no domestic transmissions across the country. Meanwhile, South Korea has reported 288 more cases overnight.
India has reported the highest single-day jump in its COVID-19 cases, with nearly 70,000 infections being reported across the country. The jump in cases takes the country's caseload to over 2.8 million. The Health Ministry said 977 people died overnight, bringing the count to nearly 54,000. The ministry reported there are over 686,000 active cases in the country. It said the Maharashtra state remains the worst affected in the country, making up more than 37% of the country's cases. India is the third worst hit country from coronavirus pandemic after the US and Brazil. Pakistan continues to report a downward trend in new COVID-19 cases and deaths as 8 people lost their lives overnight. The Health Ministry says 513 people tested positive in the last 24 hours. The country's death toll has risen to 6,209, while the infections are nearly 291,000. The ministry says the number of active cases across the country is 11,945. It reported a recovery rate of over 93% across the country. Sindh remains the worst hit province with over 127,000 infections, while Punjab has reported nearly 96,000 cases. Now, Indian troops have martyred 3 more youths in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The civilians were martyred during military crackdowns in Kupwara and Shopian districts. Indian forces have martyred nearly 220 Kashmiris since New Delhi revoked Article 370 and stripped the region of its autonomy in August last year. The occupied valley has been under a strict curfew and communications blackout since then. Hundreds of politicians and civil society activists have been also detained by the occupation forces. Earlier, Pakistan's Foreign Office said the global community must ask India to lift the year-long draconian curfew in Kashmir. The UN Security Council has condemned a mutiny in Mali and urged the military to immediately release all government officials. In an urgent meeting, the 15-member council asked the military to return to their barracks without any delay. The UNSC meeting was called to discuss the military coup and the detention of President Boubacar Keïta and Prime Minister Boubou Cissé. Mali's military coup leaders have sat down with the opposition to discuss ways of getting the government working. One of Mali's most influential power brokers, Mahmoud Dicko, says he will also withdraw from politics following the recent developments.
The General Secretaries expressed their concerns in this delicate period in which there is no government in relation to the means, in relation to credit, the problems we face, and in relation to pending files. They have been pending since the government's resignation and which are still open. So we need to manage all this to move forward.
The mutiny has drawn widespread international condemnation, while the African Union has suspended Mali's membership. Now, moving on, the UN Agency for Refugees says at least 45 migrants have died in the deadliest shipwreck of Libya so far this year. In a statement, it said 80 people were on board a vessel whose engine exploded off the coast of Zwara on Monday. The agency said 5 children were among the dead, while 37 survivors were rescued by fishermen. Both the UNHCR and the International Organization for Migration called for search and rescue efforts to be stepped up. Moving on, South Korea's Green Cross Corps has received regulatory approval for phase 2 human clinical trials of its experimental COVID-19 plasma treatment drug. The company said the trials will test the safety and efficacy of the drug in 960 severe patients with underlying conditions like pneumonia. The Ministry of Food and Drug Safety said Green Cross was allowed to skip phase 1 trials. Its therapy is the country's first to enter phase 2 for coronavirus plasma treatment. Elsewhere, Turkey is in talks with Russia, Germany and China about conducting phase 3 trials for coronavirus vaccines. Cuba will also start clinical trials next week of a potential vaccine called Sobirana 01, developed by its state-run Finlay Institute. More news coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now, moving on with the news stories. Former U.S. President Barack Obama has criticized his successor, Donald Trump, as deeply unfit for the office he occupies. He was speaking at the third night of the virtual Democratic National Convention. Obama accused President Trump of dealing with the presidency as a reality show. The former president said electing Joe Biden will ensure the survival of American democracy. Meanwhile, U.S. Senator Kamala Harris has accepted the Democratic nomination for the vice president. In her acceptance speech, Harris said Trump's disastrous leadership had cost lives and livelihoods during the COVID-19 pandemic.
We must elect a president who will bring something different, something better, and do the important work. A president who will bring all of us together, Black, white, Latino, Asian, Indigenous, to achieve the future we collectively want. We must elect Joe Biden.
Well, Biden will take on the Republican President Trump in the elections on November the 3rd. Now, the US has ended 3 bilateral agreements with Hong Kong following China's imposition of a national security law. In a statement, the State Department said the move underscores Washington's deep concerns regarding Beijing's security law. It said these pacts cover the surrender of fugitives, transfer of sentenced persons and tax exemptions from ship operations. The follows US President Donald Trump's order last month to end Hong Kong's special status. Earlier this month, Washington also imposed sanctions on Hong Kong's leader, Carrie Lam. The US has announced nearly $204 million in additional humanitarian assistance for Iraq. In a statement, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the aid has been provided for Iraqi refugees and communities hosting them. Pompeo said the assistance will provide critical shelter, healthcare, food and hygiene services across Iraq. Pompeo added the aid will increase access to education and other opportunities. Earlier, Pompeo hosted Iraqi Prime Minister Mustafa al-Khatimi in Washington. Both leaders met as part of an ongoing strategic dialogue between the two nations. Khatimi is the first Iraqi leader to visit the US since 2017. Moving on, Lebanon's Hezbollah says it will not evaluate the verdict of a UN tribunal that convicted its member on the 2005 killing of former Premier Rafiq al-Hariri. While addressing media, Hezbollah MP Hassan Fadlallah said the movement is not concerned about the verdict. Fadlallah said the group has never recognized the court and its stance has been further solidified by this new verdict. While the court found no evidence of direct involvement by the leadership of Hezbollah, the judges said the killing was clearly a politically motivated act of terrorism. The movement has been under intense scrutiny as many allege its involvement in the port blast as well, which killed more than 180 people. Now in Pakistan, 14 people have died in torrential rains overnight in different parts of the most populated Punjab province. Rescue officials say several were injured in rains that devastated the central region of the province. They said 5 people were killed in Mandi Bahauddin after a fragile home's roof collapsed. The officials said 4 others were killed in a similar incident in eastern Lahore city. In Shekwal, 3 laborers lost their lives after being stuck in a coal mine during rains. 2 others died in Shekhupura city. In the US, lightning strikes have sparked dozens of wildfires in Northern California, burning dozens of structures and forcing thousands to flee their homes. More about this blaze in this report.
California was hit by nearly 11,000 lightning strikes in 72 hours, sparking 367 fires. Nearly 24 of the wildfires are major as the state is also suffering from a record heat wave. U.S. authorities say the pilot of a helicopter fighting fires in California has died after his aircraft crashed. Governor Gavin Newsom has declared an emergency as authorities battle hundreds of blazes.
We are experiencing fires, the likes of which we haven't seen in many, many years. The totality, when you consider 367 active fires that we are aware of all across the state of California, and again, when the smoke starts clearing, the conditions avail themselves with all the reconnaissance that's being done all across the state.
A group of fires about 20 miles east of Palo Alto more than doubled in size overnight and is now burning over 85,000 acres. Governor Newsom has requested 375 fire engines from out of state, with Arizona, Nevada, and Texas sending assistance.
We have requested what we refer to as an EMAC, and this is our emergency assistance program with states all across the western United States. We've now requested 375 EMAC, meaning engines, to come from other states.
Officials went door to door overnight in a frantic effort to clear homes. Thousands of people flee their homes in major cities of California, including San Francisco, after several quick-moving wildfires swept into the region.
Now in Colombia, a craftist, Edgar Alvarez, is making a statement in Bogota with clay. He is using his artwork to raise COVID-19 awareness and shed light on the lives of millions of Venezuelan migrants. More in this report.
Edgar Alvarez, a Colombian artist, is making a name for himself abroad by seeking to explain current affairs and historical events in an engaging way. His coronavirus caricature can be spotted in nooks of the Colombian capital, not far from where citizens etch out a life in street stalls as a way to make ends meet.
This pandemic has changed us, so it is essential to be able to depict people struggling with it, and that is where I come in to explain it with clay plasticine. It is precisely that, to bring a clear message to people, and that's how it works. With clay plasticine, it is easier to explain certain issues.
Alvarez is hoping to shape popular perception on Venezuelan migrants, both functionally and in abstract. As Colombia is the main destination for Venezuelans fleeing from political, social, and economic crisis under the government of President Nicolas Maduro, he has molded figures to represent people fleeing their homes with what little belongings they can muster on their backs.
I take a lot of photographs of migrants in real-life spaces because that has been important during all of this, to provide a dose of the reality facing these people and in the places where things happen to them.
Alvarez's craftivism has gone global, with hundreds of thousands of fans on Facebook and Twitter on his It's Explained Through Clay pages. His 2015 claymation entitled Los Invisibles touched on the problem of homelessness in the US city of Los Angeles.
And the White House says it will be unusual for the U.S. Treasury to get a cut from the sale of video sharing app TikTok's U.S. operations. White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow said U.S. President Donald Trump probably wants to deny China some of the proceeds from the sale. Kudlow was unsure if any funds will end up in the Treasury, saying the proposal itself is unusual, but Trump has his own opinion on these matters. Last week, Trump ordered ByteDance-owned TikTok to divest its U.S. operations within 90 days in a bid to pressurize Chinese firms over data security concerns. Trump suggested the U.S. government should get a substantial portion of the proceeds from the sale. Recently, the Oracle Corporation expressed an interest in procuring the app's operations in North America, Australia, and New Zealand. American tech giant Apple has become the first U.S. company to reach a $2 trillion market value mark. The company had previously become the first to hit $1 trillion in March 2018. The iPhone maker is followed by other tech companies, including Amazon, Microsoft, and Google parent Alphabet. The shares of Apple have doubled from the lows of March, lifting chief executive Tim Cook's net worth to $1 billion. Apple's rise comes in the wake of a broader rally in technology shares as employees across the U.S. shift to working from home. Now, Asian markets are trading lower as China announced it will keep the benchmark lending rate unchanged. South Korea's Kospi has dropped more than 2.5%. Mainland Chinese stocks were lower as Hong Kong's Hang Seng dropped over 1.5%, while the Shanghai Composite dropped more than 1%. The Shenzhen component has dipped 1.2%. Over in Australia, the S&P ASX 200 declined 0.85%. In Japan, the Nikkei 225 slipped nearly 1%, while the Tropics Index shed by 0.73%. In football, Bayern Munich beat Olympic Lyonnais by 3-0 to reach the finals of the Champions League at Estadio José Alvalade. Bayern will be looking for their 6th European crown when they face Paris Saint-Germain in the final on Sunday. Lyon's Memphis Depay Carl Toko Ekambi missed early chances before Bayern grabbed the lead through Serge Gnabry in the 18th minute. Gnabry struck again in the 33rd minute as he started and finished the move that involved Robert Lewandowski and Ivan Perisic. Lewandowski made sure of the result with a strike in the 88th minute as the French side were left to rue more missed chances in the second half. The German side will be looking to become the first team to win the Champions League with a 100% record in the tournament this season. Now let's have a look at the weather updates. Well, that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.